The wagon stopped where the grass had died. Elias Cord didn't mean to stop there. He'd been riding the trade road south from Prescott for 3 days, hauling furniture and cookware to a mining camp that probably didn't exist anymore. The road curved near a dried creek bed, and that's where he saw her. A girl, maybe 12, standing in the middle of nowhere with her hands folded in front of her like she was waiting for church to start. He pulled the reins, the horses snorted, stamping dust into the air. The girl didn't move. She wore a faded cotton dress too big for her frame, sleeves rolled past her elbows. Her hair was pulled back tight, but strands had come loose and stuck to her forehead. She stared at the wagon with eyes that didn't blink. Elias leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You lost." She didn't answer. He glanced around. No homestead, no camp, just open land stretching in every direction, cracked earth and scattered sage. The sun pressed down hard, turning the air heavy and still. "Where's your folks?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she turned her head slightly, looking past him toward the back of the wagon, her gaze held there. Elias frowned. He set the brake and climbed down, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. He walked around the side of the wagon slowly, one hand resting near the knife on his belt. When he reached the back, he stopped. 3 children sat huddled together beneath the canvas tarp. 2 boys and another girl. The oldest looked maybe 8. The youngest couldn't have been more than 4. They were filthy, covered in dust and something darker, dried mud maybe, or worse. Their clothes hung in rags. The smallest one, a boy, clutched a wooden horse so worn the paint had rubbed off completely. Elias stared at them. They stared back. "How long you been back here?" None of them answered. The oldest boy's jaw tightened, like he was holding words behind his teeth. Elias looked back toward the girl in the road. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still folded. Her face was unreadable. He walked back to her, slower this time. When he stopped in front of her, she tilted her head up to meet his eyes. Hers were gray, the color of rain that never comes. "Those yours?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "Your brothers and sister?" She shook her head. Elias' stomach turned cold. He crouched down so they were eye level. "Then who are they?" The girl's lips pressed together. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of her dress. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Mine." The word hung in the air like smoke. Elias didn't move. He studied her face, the hollow beneath her cheekbones, the way her shoulders pulled inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. She looked brittle, like something that might break if touched. "You're telling me you're their mother?" She nodded again. He stood up slowly, running a hand through his hair. His mind turned over the impossibility of it. 12 years old, maybe 13 if she was small for her age, but even then. "How?" Her eyes dropped to the ground. "They were left." "Left where?" "Different places." Her voice was flat, like she'd said it too many times. "I found them." Elias looked back at the wagon. The 3 children were still sitting there, silent as stones. The smallest one's eyes followed him, wide and unblinking. "How long you been caring for them?" 2 years, maybe more." "And you been walking?" She nodded. "Walking where?" She didn't answer. Her gaze drifted past him again, toward the horizon. There was nothing out there, just heat and distance. Elias rubbed his jaw, feeling the scrape of stubble under his palm. Every instinct told him to keep moving. He had a delivery to make. He had his own troubles. Getting involved with something like this, whatever this was, wouldn't end well. But he looked at the girl again, at the way she stood so still, like she'd learned that moving too much drew attention, at the way her hands were raw and cracked, the knuckles split open from work or cold or both. "You got food?" She shook her head. "Water?" "A little." He exhaled hard through his nose. Then he turned and walked to the front of the wagon, pulling a canteen from beneath the seat. He brought it back and held it out to her. She took it carefully, like it might vanish if she moved too fast. She drank, then capped it and held it against her chest. "What's your name?" Elias asked. "Anna." "Anna what?" "Just Anna." He nodded. "All right, Anna, where you headed?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Anywhere that'll take us." The wind picked up, carrying dust across the road. Elias could hear the faint creak of the wagon behind him, the shuffle of small feet against wood. He looked at Anna, at the children in the wagon, at the empty road stretching south. Then he climbed back onto the wagon seat and picked up the reins. "Get in," he said. Anna didn't move. "All four of you," he adds. Ed, his voice rougher than he meant it to be, "Get in." Anna stared at him, her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her hands tightened around the canteen. And then slowly her face began to change. Her chin trembled, her eyes filled, and the tears spilled over before she could stop them. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there, crying silently, her whole body shaking with something she'd been holding back for too long. Elias looked away. He didn't know what else to do. After a moment, Anna wiped her face with the back of her hand. She walked to the back of the wagon and climbed in beside the others. The smallest boy reached for her immediately, and she pulled him into her lap. Elias released the brake and snapped the reins. The wagon rolled forward, carrying them all into the empty miles ahead. They didn't speak for hours. Elias kept his eyes on the road, listening to the creak of the wheels and the low murmur of wind through the sage. Behind him, he heard the shuffle of small bodies adjusting against the cargo, the occasional whisper too quiet to make out. Once, he heard Anna's voice, soft and steady, saying something that made the youngest boy stop whimpering. By the time the sun started to sink, they'd reached a low ridge overlooking a dry riverbed. Elias pulled the wagon off the road and into the shade of a cluster of cottonwoods. The trees were mostly dead, their branches pale and brittle, but they offered some cover from the wind. He climbed down and began unhitching the horses. Anna appeared beside him without a sound, watching. "You know how to start a fire?" he asked. She nodded. "There's kindling in the sack near the back wheel. Get it going. I'll see what I've got for food." Anna moved quickly, gathering the wood and kneeling in the dirt to arrange it. The three other children climbed out of the wagon and sat close together, their eyes following her every movement. They didn't wonder, they didn't play, they just watched and waited. Elias pulled out a sack of cornmeal, some dried meat, and a dented pot. It wasn't much, but it would make a thin stew. He filled the pot with water from his barrel and set it over the flames once Anna had them going. She worked efficiently, her hands quick and sure. When the fire caught, she sat back on her heels and exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath. Elias crouched beside her, adding the meat and meal to the pot. How long since they ate? "Yesterday morning." He stirred the mixture without looking at her. "And you?" She didn't answer. He glanced over. Her face was turned toward the fire, her expression unreadable. "Anna." 2 days. He stopped stirring, his jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt clumsy in his mouth, so he stayed quiet and kept working. When the stew was ready, he ladled it into tin cups and passed them around. The children took theirs carefully, holding the cups with both hands like they were afraid of spilling a single drop. They ate slowly, methodically, their eyes flicking between the food and Anna, as if seeking permission. Anna ate last. She sipped from her cup and watched the others, her gaze never leaving them. Elias sat across the fire, chewing on a piece of hardtack. He studied the girl in the firelight. She looked older now, her face shadowed and still. But when the smallest boy leaned against her, she softened, her hand moving to rest on his head. "Where'd you find them?" Elias asked. Anna's eyes stayed on the fire. The first one was in a mining camp. His mother died of fever. No one wanted him. "And the others?" "One was left at a church. The other 2 were living in a burned-out barn." Elias set his cup down. "So you just took them? No one else was going to? You were 10 years old." I was old enough to see them. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't harden, it just was, flat and final, like she'd stopped expecting anyone to understand. Elias leaned back, exhaling slowly. You got any family? No. Anyone looking for you? She shook her head. Then where the hell were you walking to? Anna finally looked at him. Her grey eyes reflected the firelight, and for a moment she looked older than 12, older than anything. Somewhere they'd be safe. That's not a place, that's a hope. It's all I got. The words hit harder than they should have. Elias looked away, staring out into the dark. He thought about the mining camp he was heading toward, about the life he'd built for himself, a life that didn't include complications like this. He could drop them off in the next town, leave them with a church or a boarding house, someone else's problem. But he'd seen those places. He knew what happened to children like these. They disappeared. They were forgotten. He glanced back at Anna. She was wiping the smallest boy's face with the edge of her sleeve, murmuring something too soft to hear. The boy smiled faintly, his eyes half closed. Elias rubbed his face with both hands. You can't. Keep doing this. I don't have a choice. You do, you just don't see it yet. Anna met his gaze again, and this time there was something harder in her expression. What would you have done? Left them? He didn't answer. That's what I thought. The fire crackled between them. The children were already falling asleep, curled against each other like a litter of puppies. Elias stood up and walked to the edge of the camp, staring out at the ridge line. The stars were beginning to appear, pale and distant. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know where this was going, but he knew one thing. He wasn't leaving them behind. When he turned back, Anna was watching him. She didn't say anything, but her expression had changed, just slightly, like she was allowing herself to hope. Elias walked back to the fire and sat down. We'll head to Grafton in the morning. It's a day's ride. I know someone there who might help. Anna's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Thank you. He grunted and poked at the fire with a stick. Don't thank me yet. This ain't over. But as he said it, he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Faint, maybe a mile out, coming closer. Anna heard it too, her head snapped up, her body going rigid. Elias stood slowly, his hand moving to the rifle leaning against the wagon. The hoofbeats grew louder. And then, through the darkness, a voice called out. You got something that don't belong to you, mister. 3 riders emerged from the shadow of the ridge. They came slowly, their horses picking through the rocks with deliberate care. The lead rider was broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low. The 2 behind him were younger, leaner, their faces hard to read in the dim light. But Elias could see the way they sat their saddles, ready, alert, hands resting near their belts. Elias didn't lower the rifle. He stood beside the wagon, his body angled to keep Anna and the children behind him. Anna had already moved, pulling the 3 kids close and backing them toward the far side of the fire. The lead rider stopped 10 feet away. He leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes moving from Elias to the children and back again. Evening, he said. His voice was slow, almost friendly. Elias didn't respond. The man smiled faintly. Saw your fire from the ridge. Thought I'd come see who was camped out here. He gestured toward the children. Seems like you got yourself a little collection. They're with me, Elias said. That's so, the man tilted his head. Funny thing, I've been tracking a girl and some runaways for near 2 weeks now. Girl matches the description of that one right there. Elias' grip tightened on the rifle. She's not a runaway. Didn't say she was. The man's smile widened. But those kids, they belong to folks who'd like them back. Folks who left them to die, you mean? The man shrugged. Ain't my business what folks do with their own. I just collect what I'm paid to collect. One of the younger riders shifted in his saddle, his hand moving closer to his gun. Elias caught the movement and adjusted his stance slightly, the rifle barrel lifting just enough to make his intent clear. The lead rider noticed. His smile faded. Easy, mister. No need for this to get ugly. Then ride on. Can't do that. The man straightened in his saddle. See, there's a bounty on that girl, $50, and another 20 for each of the kids. Anna's voice cut through the tension, quiet but firm. There's no bounty, he's lying. The man's eyes flicked to her. You calling me a liar, girl? Anna stepped forward, her chin lifted. You're not a lawman, you're a trader. The word hung in the air like a curse. The man's expression darkened. Careful, girl. You sell children, Anna continued, her voice steady, to mines, to brothels, to anyone who'll pay. Elias felt his stomach twist. He'd heard stories, men who made their living trafficking unwanted kids to labor camps or worse. He'd never believed it, or maybe he just hadn't wanted to. The lead rider's jaw tightened. I provide services to folks in need, that's all. You're a slaver, Anna said. The man's hand moved to his gun. Elias fired. The shot cracked through the night, splitting the silence. The bullet hit the ground 3 feet in front of the man's horse. The animal reared, and the rider cursed, yanking the reins to keep from being thrown. The 2 younger riders drew their guns, but Elias already had the rifle leveled at them. Next one goes through flesh, he said. The lead rider steadied his horse, his face flushed with anger. You just made a mistake, friend. I'm not your friend. The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he glanced at Anna and the children. You think you're saving them? You're just making it worse. There's more of us. We'll find you. Then you'll find a grave. The man's lip curled. He spat into the dirt, then jerked his reins around. Let's go. The 3 riders turned and disappeared back into the darkness, their hoofbeats far ding into the distance. Elias stood there for a long time, the rifle still raised. His hands were shaking, but he didn't lower the weapon until the sound of the horses was completely gone. When he finally turned, Anna was standing beside him. They'll come back, she said quietly. I know. With more men. Probably. Anna looked up at him, her gray eyes searching his face. Why did you do that? Elias exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. Because I've seen enough people turn away. Anna's expression softened, just slightly. Then she turned and walked back to the children, who were huddled together near the fire, their eyes wide with fear. Elias watched her crouch beside them, her voice low and soothing. The smallest boy reached for her, and she pulled him close, rocking him gently. Elias set the rifle down and stared out into the dark. His mind turned over the possibilities. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't go back. The only option was forward, toward Grafton, toward the person he thought might help. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't enough. Those men would come back, and when they did, it wouldn't be a warning, it would be blood. He looked at Anna again, at the way she held the children, her body a shield around them. She was 12 years old, and she was braver than most men he'd ever met. He made a decision then, standing in the dark under the dead cottonwoods. He'd get them to safety, or he'd die trying. Because the alternative, letting them fall into the hands of men like that, wasn't something he could live with. Anna glanced up and met his eyes across the fire. She didn't say anything, but she nodded once like she understood. Elias nodded back. Then he picked up the rifle, checked the load, and settled in to keep watch through the night. The sun rose pale and cold. Elias hadn't slept. He'd kept the fire going through the night, feeding it twigs and brush while his eyes scanned the ridgeline for movement. There'd been nothing, just wind and darkness and the distant howl of coyotes. Anna woke first. She stirred beneath the blanket he'd given her, then sat up slowly, blinking against the early light. The 3 children were still asleep, tangled together in a heap of limbs and shared warmth. She looked at Elias. He was sitting against the wagon wheel, the rifle across his lap. You didn't sleep, she said. Didn't need to. You can't stay awake forever. I'll sleep when we're safe. Anna stood and walked over to him, her bare feet silent in the dirt. She crouched beside him, her arms wrapped around her knees. You should go, she said quietly. Leave us here, we'll find a way. Elias glanced at her. You think I'd do that? I think you should. Why? Because those men will kill you. He looked back out at the horizon. Maybe. Not maybe, they will, and it'll be because of us. Elias turned to face her fully. You listen to me, what those men do ain't your fault. You didn't ask to be hunted. You didn't ask for any of this. But I brought it to you. No, I chose it. Soon as I let you into that wagon, I chose it. Anna's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Why? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I had a daughter once. Anna didn't move. She was about your age, maybe a little younger. His voice was rough, like the words hurt to say. She got sick one winter. Fever took her in 3 days. My wife followed a month later. Same sickness. Anna's expression softened. I'm sorry. I left after that, couldn't stay in the house, couldn't stay in the town. I just walked for a long time. And you never stopped walking. He nodded slowly. Guess not. Anna looked down at her hands. What was her name? Clara. The name hung between them, fragile and sacred. Would she have done what I did? Anna asked. Take in the lost ones. Elias smiled faintly. She'd have taken in the whole damn territory if she could. Anna smiled too, just a little. It was the first time he'd seen it, and it changed her face completely. For a moment, she looked like what she was, a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Behind them, the smallest boy woke with a soft whimper. Anna stood immediately and went to him, lifting him into her arms. He buried his face in her shoulder, his small hands clutching her dress. Elias watched her sway gently, humming something low and wordless. The other 2 children stirred and sat up, rubbing their eyes. We need to move soon, Elias said. Anna nodded. I'll get them ready. She set the boy down and began folding the blanket, her movements quick and practiced. The children helped, their small hands fumbling with the fabric. They didn't complain. They didn't ask questions. They just worked, silent and efficient. Elias stood and walked to the horses, checking their hooves and adjusting the harness. As he worked, he felt a small hand tug on his sleeve. He looked down. The oldest boy was standing beside him, his face serious. Mister. Yes. You gonna leave? Us. Elias crouched down so they were eye level. No. You promise? Elias hesitated. Promises were dangerous things. They broke too easy. But he looked at the boy's face, thin and pale, his eyes too old for his age, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. I promise. The boy nodded once, then turned and walked back to his siblings. Elias stood slowly, his chest tight. By the time they were ready to leave, the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the dry riverbed. Elias helped the children into the wagon, making sure they were settled among the cargo. Anna climbed in last, sitting at the edge with her legs dangling over the side. Elias climbed onto the seat and picked up the reins. Grafton's half a day's ride, he said. We'll be there by afternoon. Anna looked at him, and then we find someone who can help. What if there's no one? Elias didn't answer right away. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. Then we figure something else out, he said finally. Anna didn't respond, but she leaned back against the cargo, her hand resting on the youngest boy's head. The child was already dozing again, his wooden horse clutched tight in his hand. The wagon rolled south, following the curve of the road. The land opened up around them, wide and empty, the sky stretching forever. Elias glanced back once. Anna was watching the horizon, her face calm but distant. He turned back to the road. He didn't know what waited for them in Grafton. He didn't know if the person he was thinking of would even help. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't turning back. Not now, not ever. Behind him, Anna began to hum softly, the same wordless tune she'd sung to the boy. The sound drifted forward on the wind, quiet and fragile, like a prayer whispered into the dust. Elias listened, and for the first time in years, he felt something he'd thought was gone. Hope. Grafton appeared on the horizon just after noon. It wasn't much, a scattering of buildings along a dry creek, a church with a crooked steeple, a general store with faded paint. But it was something, it was people, it was shelter. Elias guided the wagon down the main street, past a blacksmith's shop and a saloon with its doors propped open. A few townspeople glanced up as he passed, their eyes lingering on the children in the back of the wagon. He stopped in front of a small house at the edge of town. It was modest, with a covered porch and a garden out front that looked better tended than most. Smoke curled from the chimney. "Wait here," Elias said to Anna. He climbed down and walked to the door. Before he could knock, it swung open. A woman stood in the doorway. She was in her 50s, gray-haired and solid, with sharp eyes that took in everything at once. When she saw Elias, her expression shifted from wariness to recognition. "Elias Cord," she said, "didn't expect to see you again." "Ruth." She crossed her arms. "What brings you to my door?" Elias glanced back at the wagon. "I need help." Ruth followed his gaze. Her eyes moved over the children, then to Anna, who was watching them both with quiet intensity. Ruth's expression softened. "Lord have mercy. Can we come in?" She stepped aside without a word. Elias returned to the wagon and helped the children down. They followed him in a silent line, Anna bringing up the rear. Ruth ushered them inside, her voice gentle as she directed them toward the kitchen table. The house was warm and smelled like bread. The children sat down carefully, their hands folded in their laps. Ruth studied them for a moment, then turned to Elias. "What happened?" Elias told her everything, the girl on the road, the children in the wagon, the men who'd come in the night. Ruth listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to Anna. "What's your name, child?" "Anna." "And these are your responsibility?" Anna nodded. "You're 12 years old." "Yes, ma'am." Ruth's eyes softened. "You've been carrying the weight of the world, haven't you?" Anna's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Ruth walked over and crouched in front of her, taking her hands. "You did good, Anna. You did more than most grown folks would have done, but you can't do it alone anymore." Anna's eyes filled. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "Yes, you do." Ruth squeezed her hands. "Right here." Anna stared at her, disbelieving. Ruth stood and turned to Elias. "They can stay with me, all of them." "You sure about that?" "I've got room, and I've got help from the church. We'll manage." Elias exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. "Thank you." Ruth waved him off. "Thank me by sticking around long enough to make sure those men don't come back." "They will. Then we'll be ready." Over the next 2 days, Elias stayed in Grafton. He spoke with the sheriff, a wiry man named Cole who'd heard rumors of child traders working the territory. Cole organized a watch posting me at the edges of town. On the 3rd day, the riders came. There were 5 of them this time, the same lead man at the front. They rode into town just after dawn, their horses kicking up dust. Elias was waiting. He stood in the middle of the street, the rifle in his hands. Behind him, Cole and 4 other men stood in a line, armed and silent. The lead rider stopped 20 feet away. His eyes moved from Elias to the men behind him. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," the man said. "You're not taking them," Elias replied. "I got legal claim." "You got nothing." Cole stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "I'm Sheriff Cole, and I'm telling you to turn around and ride out. Now." The lead rider's jaw worked. He glanced at the men with him, then back at Cole. "This ain't over." "Yeah," Cole said, "it is." The rider stared at Elias for a long moment. Then he spat into the dirt and yanked his reins around. The 5 men rode out, their horses disappearing into the distance. Elias watched until they were gone. Then he lowered the rifle and exhaled. Cole clapped him on the shoulder. You did good. Wasn't just me. No, but you started it. Elias walked back to Ruth's house. Anna was sitting on the porch steps, the three children playing in the yard with a ball Ruth had given them. When she saw him, she stood. They're gone, Elias said. Anna's shoulders sagged with relief. For good. For good. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded. Got a delivery to finish, but I'll come back, check on you. Anna smiled faintly. You don't have to. I know, but I will. She walked down the steps and stood in front of him. Then, without warning, she wrapped her arms around him. Elias froze for a moment, then slowly put his arms around her, holding her gently. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. When she pulled away, there were tears on her face, but she was smiling. Elias climbed onto the wagon and picked up the reins. He looked back one last time. Anna was standing in the yard, the children gathered around her. Ruth stood on the porch, watching. Elias tipped his hat, then snapped the reins. The wagon rolled forward, carrying him back into the wide, empty miles. Years later, people in Grafton would still tell the story. About the girl who saved 4 children, about the man who helped her, about the day they stood together and said no to the darkness. Anna grew up in Ruth's house. She became a teacher. The children grew too, each finding their place in the world. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Elias found them, Anna would stand on the porch and look south, toward the road that had brought her here. She never saw him again. But she never forgot. And neither did they.